You have other systems that touch it, but not fully. And so if you're interested, you can just join our Discord. You can scan the QR code or just go to uniform.to/Discord so we can chat about this, because it is a really exciting way for the future. And so thank you very much. If you like this,
ended up with a diagram that's a little bit more daunting, which looks something like this. Yeah, and it's supposed to look a little bit daunting, but don't worry, I'm going to go through each part of it. So I'm going to dive into Excalibur for this. Oh my God, I'm looking at myself. That's terrifying.
Share your screen now.
You want me to share my screen? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Right. You can watch me all fail with this. Screen sharing chips. Good. Oh, I've got it.
Oh, you haven't.
I probably have to open thingy to do this.
Yeah, that's fine. So
That's fine. Let me open my system preferences.
So last year you also gave a talk in the previous conference, and it was a bit about micro-frontends. So maybe you can see that as well. What was that talk about?
It was about micro-frontends and migrating.
The idea of all these talks is like that we want to show different examples of companies using micro-frontends, and IT is quite a big corp, and we want to see how do they use the systems. We did the same thing with, we have another talk later with Adidas. So we want to compare how do they do it, what do they use. So previous talk, we're looking at Valor, and we're looking more of how it can be done. And then next week, on Friday, not next week, is this week. We can see with Zach more about SSR, moving for federation, and we can learn more about it.
Okay.
So
Is this working? Is this working?
Let me go back.
People are back. It's all very difficult. I've got to share on two different things. It's kind of beyond me, which doesn't fill you with confidence about my talk, does it? But anyway. Sure, maybe. Is that better? Is that too bright? Okay, cool. Well, hopefully people can see it. Is the stream working? All good? Okay, cool. Right, I'm going to carry on. So I promised I'd go through this diagram. So I was switching to Excalibur just so it's a little bit easier for me to kind of drag around. So this diagram's kind of split into two main segments. Hopefully you can see that. On the left-hand side, we have a vertical team, and you can think of that as a team that's responsible for some sort of complete client journey. Think like payments or account opening, that sort of side of things. They're responsible for like a specific client journey. And on the right-hand side, we have a platform team, and they're responsible. People have talked about a shell or a host application. That's essentially what our platform team is responsible for, things like navigation and authentication. So diving into these segments a little bit more, I want to start with this micro front-end build. So you can imagine your vertical team has some independent deployable, and they want to run through a normal CI/CD pipeline. So they run their build, they run all their tests and linting, etc. And once they've done that, they upload their assets to some sort of static server with an edge cache. In our case, it's AWS S3 with a CloudFront distribution. But we also expect these vertical teams to make an HTTP request to this thing, which is an import map build. So for those of you who don't know import maps, they're essentially just key value pairs where the key is some unique identifier for a micro front end, and the value is just a URL that you can fetch kind of the entry point for that micro front end asset, or any asset for that matter. So we have a build plan that essentially manages that for us, manages updating, and it's sort of the interop point between our vertical teams and our platform teams. So given an HTTP request with some sort of contextual information around what micro front ends we want to update, our import map build updates the import map and uploads it to that same sort of setup, that same static server with an edge cache. And then you can imagine that our clients come and visit our host application down here. They load our sort of host application source into the browser, and then they click around for a while and they decide they want to make some payments. And so we fetch an import map, and we search for the payments micro front end, and from that we get our URL, and that URL points us to that micro front end source. Right? So you can see how all these pieces work together. And for the eagle-eyed among you, and I'm hoping the guy that shouted to be in the light mode is kind of paying attention and can see that I've missed a big part of the diagram. We've got this big section in the middle, which is our internal NPM repository. So one of the key things that we found was that sharing a component library between all of our different micro-frontends and our host application kept like a cohesive brand, made sure that it didn't seem like we were building kind of a Frankenstein front end where every single app had kind of a completely different design system. So jumping back to the slides, it's all working, it's great. There's a few things about this that I want to call out as stuff that we found pretty successful. So the first of that is this HTTP request and this import map build pipeline. This is a really powerful way to like allow sort of independent vertical teams to kind of really own their micro front ends and reduce the interaction between the sort of vertical teams and our host team. And secondly, our component library is probably unsurprising that having a cohesive design system makes it a lot easier to build a good sort of web experience with multiple micro front ends. There are a few things that we could have done better. Namely, you saw us go from a very simple diagram to a very complicated one. We went a bit kind of big bang with our micro front end migration. And I think if we were to go back again, we'd probably take a more step-by-step approach. I've got a demo which will hopefully explain how we can do that. But the other main thing that we didn't do from the off was include types. So we were migrating to TypeScript as we started doing this. So we didn't really think about how important the interfaces between our micro front ends and our host application were. But in hindsight, we've had a few issues where we're wondering why we're passing a number when we're expecting a string, all the stuff that TypeScript helps deal with. So the way we sort of manage this is that we'd expect each micro front end would publish a types package to this internal repository, and then our host application would kind of consume that types package. So just to summarize kind of all the diagrams and the ticks that I've put together so far, we've kind of got the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've had that a few times already this evening, to be fair. But the good is obviously that HTTP triggered manifest file and that shared design library. The bad being that lack of type definitions and that kind of big bang migration to micro front ends. And I've also got the ugly here, which I want to call out because it added a lot of complexity to the way we approach the problem and the tools we could use. But I am going to forget about it. So we're dealing with a big legacy monolithic application which had multiple frameworks, and as a result of those multiple frameworks had multiple build tools, and that just limited the kind of technologies that we had at our disposal. So like I said, I'm going to forget about that bit and pretend it's not there because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the talk. So can we take the stuff that's in the bad column and make it to kind of benefits and things that we could do better? And if we were to do this again, obviously, rather than having no type definitions, I'd have type definitions. That's really straightforward. But with this kind of big bang migration to micro front ends, what I'd prefer to look at is kind of a step-by-step migration approach where you can first take a monolithic application, move it to a mono repo and load sort of build time micro front ends, if you like, which are just kind of NPM packages that provide some level of independence for teams, and then make a really easy way for teams to then test out whether a runtime micro front end model is appropriate for them, but something that's sort of easily reversible so that they can test without sort of fully committing to that architecture. So I've said a lot of words. Let's actually do a demo because I think it's a bit more interesting. So I'm going to show you why I'm not a web designer and why I'm not a games developer as well. So this is Cookie Catcher. Cookie Catcher is a very simple game, which I actually haven't deployed anywhere, but I'm sure I will if you're particularly interested in playing a terrible game that I put together in a few hours. But it's got three main parts. It's got this kind of header, which we think would belong to our host application. It's got this notifications section, which we're going to migrate today in this demo. And then we've got kind of a Cookie Catcher game, which I will play once and let you guys play another time. I'm really shit at this. Last score 4, terrible. Okay, so let's have a look at the code for this. Is this big enough? Can people see this? Yeah, good, great, cool. So our application currently is just a monolith, and it's just a Next.js app. And we've got kind of three main components here. We've got our navbar, like I said. We've got our cookie catcher component, and then we've got kind of our notifications component. And then if we scroll down a little bit, we've got a couple of packages that we're going to move our sort of components to into their own micro front ends, and we're going to be focusing on this notifications one. And then the last thing I want to call out is this micro front end loader package, which we're going to use to actually sort of load in our micro front ends. And the key behind this is basically this just abstracts away the actual sort of implementation details around loading a micro front end. So this is something that probably would be done by a host team and would only be done once. In this case, for build time, we're just using Webpack dynamic imports, and at runtime, we're using single SPA, but that's just for the sake of this demo to show that you could want different implementations, and it's easy to kind of abstract that away from your vertical teams. So without further ado, let's actually move this notifications component into its own sort of micro front end. So the first thing we need to do is take our notifications and drag it down to notifications and then in source components. So I'm going to move that. And with that moved, you can see we've got a few relative imports we need to fix. The first one of these is get notifications from our app web client API. So if we go back to our monolithic application, we can take this, our get notifications, and also the type. We'll cut this out of our monolithic app and move it to the API file that I created earlier in our notifications micro front end. I'm going to tell you as well, I also cheated and copied our notification type earlier, so I can just reference that from the types in our micro front end. So going back to our notifications, we can now reference this here. And our types, as like I've already mentioned. And the last thing that we've not touched is our styles. So I'm going to take them from our monolithic application and just move them into our micro front end. Cool. So we're going to save all of that. That's the mistake I normally make, is forgetting to save this. So we've moved our components. We've kind of got our micro front end set up, but we need some entry points. And again, this is kind of just for the sake of the demo, but to show that you can have different entry points for like build time and runtime micro front ends if you want to. Okay, cool. I'm being pointed at a watch, so I'll speed up. So for our build time micro front ends, we've essentially just got this entry point here, which is just wraps our component in a query client provider that's provided by the host application, just to help dedupe some of our requests if we want to. We actually don't make any duplicated requests here, but just for the sake of what you can do. And then for our runtime micro front ends, like I said, we're just wrapping that root component in single SPA React if we wanted to support, I don't know, different frameworks, for example. So going back to index in our host application, rather than loading this notifications in, I'm instead going to use our micro front end loader, which I showed you earlier, to create a loader which can then fetch our micro front end either at build time or at runtime pretty arbitrarily. So the first thing we do to do that is call this create loader function, and this accepts a generic, which is our type, the notification props type from our micro front end. So that gives us our type safety between our host app and our micro front end. And then using that notification loader, we can literally just load our notifications in. So I'm going to comment this bit out. And then, yeah, so you can see this notification loader takes a few things. It takes all of the props that are related to the notifications, which in our case is just a query client. It also takes this wrap style just to manage some styles associated with single SPA. And then it takes this app function. And this is the most important thing, is you just pass it a function that can load your entry point, right? So in this case, it's just a Webpack dynamic import. I'm going to show you a very unexciting demo, hopefully, if this is going to load. There you go, cool. So this is obviously exactly the same app, but hopefully now we can see here. Is that too small? Oh no, it's pretty big. Cool, so you can see now, rather than loading our notifications from as part of our monolith, we're loading them using a Webpack dynamic import. Let's say, though, that the team that's responsible for notifications wants to test out using runtime micro front ends instead. It's really easy for them to do that. They just need to update the import map, that key value pair list, and this would probably be done via that import map build in an actual application. So our monorepo probably have a package that helps support that. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to literally just type it in here. So it's myorg/notifications. And then I'm actually hosting the entry point just on a localhost port, which I think is 8080. And then I just need to match up here, my org notifications, my-org-notifications.js. So with that import map updated, we can then go back to our host, and rather than using a Webpack dynamic import, we can use system.js, which will read our import map and import our notifications package. So if I've done this correctly, and I refresh this, you can see now we are loading our notifications at runtime now from a separate URL, right? So it's really easy and trivial to kind of swap between those two. So it lets teams test out what method is most appropriate for them without fully committing to that whole architectural pattern. So I just want to summarize, because I'm conscious I'm going to run out of time. If you are looking at a monolithic application and you want to migrate to a more independent model, I'd suggest you start by moving to a monorepo. Make sure you type your interfaces between your packages really, really strongly. That will solve a lot of problems for you down the line. And finally, make it really easy for teams to swap between build time and runtime micro-frontends. So I suggest extracting that loading logic makes that very easy. And by doing that, you let teams kind of test out and experiment with what pattern works best for them, and you don't prescribe some big architectural shift right from the off. So that's all I have. I'm going to finish with a little bit of shameless self-promotion. So all of the code today is available on GitHub, and that does have an example where I've migrated the actual full kind of cookie catcher game, which is a little bit more interesting. You can tweet me if you're interested. I sometimes tweet about micro-frontends, and if you have any questions that don't get answered today, you can also drop me an email. Thank you very much.
Any questions?